Your place is in a nursing home with the old people. My daughter-in-law Karen screamed at me while my own son Thomas dragged my furniture towards the window. My 74 years of life were crashing down through that window along with my belongings. He pushed me out of the house that I myself had paid for. But they didn't know that my brother Oscar, a retired general, was already waiting at the door with his old army buddies. What the general did to my son after that, I will never forget. My name is Dorothy, and that day I discovered that raising an adopted son with all my love doesn't guarantee he'll respect you when you need it most. Thomas always knew I adopted him as a baby after my husband died in military service. I gave him everything: education, a home, food, unconditional love for 45 years. Karen came into our lives 10 years ago, like a snake in a wedding dress. From the first day I saw in her eyes that calculating coldness that chilled my blood. She never wanted me in that house, and little by little she poisoned my son against me. "Dorothy, your son is a grown man now. He can't keep carrying you his whole life," she would tell me with that fake smile I hated so much. And Thomas began to change. The conversations became tense, the hugs disappeared, the looks filled with annoyance. For months I endured their poisonous comments, their hints about my age, about how I was a burden on their marriage. Karen had a plan, and I was too naive to see it coming. "Don't you think it's time you looked for a place more appropriate for your age?" she would ask me while washing the dishes I had paid for in the kitchen I had equipped. Her words were like daggers wrapped in velvet. What neither of them knew was that I was keeping a secret that could change everything. My late husband had not only left me a lifetime military pension, but he was also the owner of 3 valuable properties that he had bought as an investment. I never talked about this because I wanted Thomas to become a man on his own merits. But Karen began to suspect that I had more money than I let on. I saw her going through my papers when she thought I wasn't looking, asking Thomas about my financial situation. She was hunting, and I was her prey. "Mom, where do you get the money to buy these things?" Thomas asked me one day after I came home with some groceries. Karen was standing behind him with that smile I knew all too well. "From my pension, son. You know your father left me well taken care of," I replied without revealing the true extent of my wealth. But Karen wasn't satisfied with that answer. She began to ask more direct, more invasive questions. She wanted to know exactly how much I received, if I had savings, if there were properties. I dodged her interrogations, but she was persistent. The day everything exploded began like any other. Thomas came home from work with that face I knew too well, the face of someone who had been arguing with his wife about me. Karen appeared behind him with her arms crossed and that defiant look that warned me something bad was about to happen. "Mom, we need to talk," Thomas said, without even looking me in the eyes. I sat on the sofa preparing myself for another one of those uncomfortable conversations about my situation in the house. But this time, there was something different in the air. Karen had that triumphant smile that made my skin crawl. "We've been thinking," Thomas began, his voice trembling like someone about to betray his own mother, "and we think it would be better for everyone if you looked for another place to live." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. After so many years of sacrifice, of unconditional love, of giving him everything I had and more, my own son was kicking me out of the house. "How can you say that to me, Thomas?" I asked, feeling tears begin to form in my eyes. "It's just not working anymore. Mom, Karen and I need our space. We're a young family, and you're getting on in years." Karen came closer and put her hand on Thomas's shoulder as if marking her territory. "Dorothy, it's nothing personal, but we need privacy. We want to have children, and with an older person in the house, it's complicated." "An older person," I repeated, feeling the blood freeze in my veins. "I'm your mother-in-law, Karen. I'm the mother of the man you claim to love." "And that's exactly why you should understand," she replied with that coldness I already knew. "Young marriages need their space to grow. You've already lived your life." Thomas avoided my gaze like a coward. The son I had raised, to whom I had given everything, couldn't even defend me or look me in the eye while he stabbed me in the back. "Son, I paid for this house with the money from your father's pension. Everything you see here I bought with my work and my sacrifice," I reminded him, hoping it would awaken some conscience in him. "Mom, don't start with that again," he replied with annoyance. Yes, you helped with some expenses, but that doesn't give you the right to stay here forever." "Some expenses?" I shouted, finally losing my composure. "I paid for this entire house. I paid for your education. I paid for your wedding. I paid for everything." Karen laughed, a cold, calculated laugh full of contempt. "Dorothy, enough with the drama. You don't have as much money as you pretend. You live off a miserable pension, and we all know it." That was the last straw. Not only were they kicking me out of my own house, but they were also humiliating me, minimizing everything I had done for them. At that moment, I decided it was time for them to know the truth. But something stopped me. An inner voice told me to wait, not to reveal my cards yet. Karen and Thomas didn't deserve to know the true extent of my wealth, not after this betrayal. "You have 1 week to find a place," Karen said, as if she were the owner of the house. "There are very good nursing homes in the city, places appropriate for people your age." "A nursing home?" I asked, incredulous. "You want to put me in a nursing home?" "It's the most sensible thing to do," Thomas replied, finally showing some courage to speak. "There you'll be with people your own age. You'll have medical care activities." "I don't need medical care. I'm perfectly fine," I shouted, feeling the rage consume me from within. "Mom, don't play the victim. We know you don't have the money to live alone. You'll be better cared for in the nursing home," my son insisted, as if he were doing me a favor. Karen smiled with satisfaction. She had achieved her goal. She had gotten my own son to kick me out of the house, and now she was enjoying watching my pain. "Besides," Karen added maliciously, "this way we can remodel this house. It's very old, very outdated. It needs a complete renovation." My eyes filled with tears upon hearing those words. Not only were they kicking me out, but they also wanted to erase all trace of my presence, as if I had never existed. "And what if I don't leave?" I asked them defiantly. "You'll leave," Karen replied with an icy smile. "One way or another, you'll leave." Thomas nodded, supporting his wife. My own son, the boy I had raised with so much love, was threatening me. That night I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, thinking about everything I had been through, all the sacrifices I had made. For this, to be thrown out like an old dog. The next day, Karen began to act as if I no longer existed. She talked on the phone with her friends about the remodeling plans, about how she was going to turn my room into a study, all in front of me as if I were invisible. "Yes, we're finally getting rid of the mother-in-law," I heard her say. "It was about time. The woman is a total nuisance." Thomas said nothing. He simply allowed his wife to humiliate me in my own house. The next few days were hell. Karen treated me like an intruder, as if I were the one invading her space. She moved my things, rearranged the furniture, and looked at me with contempt every time she passed me in the hallway. "Have you found a nursing home yet?" she would ask me every morning with that fake smile I hated so much. "I'm still looking," I would reply, although the truth was I hadn't looked at all. I couldn't accept that they were kicking me out of my own house. On the 5th day, Karen lost her patience. "Dorothy, time's up. Either you leave on your own, or we're going to help you out." "Are you threatening me?" I asked, incredulous. "We're warning you," Thomas replied, with a coldness that broke my heart. That night I called my brother Oscar. We hadn't spoken in months, but I needed to tell him what was happening. "Oscar, I need your help," I said, my voice breaking with tears. "What's wrong, Dorothy? Are you okay?" "No, I'm not okay. Thomas is kicking me out of the house. He and his wife want to put me in a nursing home." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I knew my brother. I knew that when he was quiet, it was because he was furious. "What did you say?" he finally asked with that deep voice that reminded me of when we were children and he would defend me from the neighborhood bullies. "You heard me, Oscar. After everything I did for him, he's throwing me out like a dog." "That boy is going to find out who Oscar Miller is," he told me, and I knew my brother already had a plan. The 7th day arrived like a storm. Karen woke up with a different energy, a fierce determination that set my nerves on edge. Thomas left for work early, avoiding my gaze as he always did lately. "Dorothy, today's the day," Karen announced as she drank her coffee as if she were talking about the weather. You've had enough time to find a place. If you don't leave willingly, we'll do it the hard way." "The hard way?" I asked, feeling my heart race. "Exactly," she replied, with that icy smile I hated so much. "I'm going to call some friends to help you move out, whether you like it or not." I spent the whole morning in my room, trembling, not knowing what to do. I could hear Karen on the phone, organizing my expulsion as if it were a military operation. At 2 p.m, Thomas arrived with 2 men I had never seen before. "Mom, these gentlemen are going to help you get your things out," he told me, unable to look me in the eye. "How can you do this to me, Thomas?" I asked, feeling the tears begin to roll down my cheeks. "I'm your mother. I raised you. I loved you. I gave you everything." "Enough with the drama, Dorothy," Karen interrupted. "Gentlemen, you can start with the room at the back." The men began to take out my belongings without any care. My photos, my memories, my furniture. Everything was thrown out as if it were garbage. I watched as my 74 years of life crashed down through that window along with my things. "Be careful with that photo," I shouted when one of the men roughly handled the portrait of my late husband. "It's the only thing I have left of him." Karen laughed. "Dorothy, it's just an old photo. You won't have room for so many things in the nursing home." "Nursing home?" I asked, horrified. "You already enrolled me in a nursing home." "Yes, I found a perfect one for you. St. Raphael's, it's called. It's full of old people like you." "You're going to love it," she replied sarcastically. Thomas remained silent, supervising the move as if it were something normal, as if kicking out your own mother was the most natural thing in the world. "Son, please," I begged him, taking his arm. "Don't do this to me. We can talk. We can find a solution." He pulled away from my grasp roughly. "Mom, it's already decided. It's for the best for everyone." "The best for everyone," I repeated, feeling the anger begin to replace the sadness. "Or the best for your wife." Karen approached with her arms crossed. "Don't blame me, Dorothy. Thomas wants you to leave too. Tell her, honey." My son looked at me for the first time in days, but his eyes were filled with coldness. "Mom, Karen is right. We need our space. We want to start a family." "I am your family," I shouted, desperate. "I'm the only family you've had since you were a baby." "You were," Karen corrected cruelly. "But not anymore. Now his family is me." The men continued to take out my things, my clothes, my books, my medicines. Everything was treated like junk. When they got to my jewelry box, the small chest where I kept the few treasures I had left from my husband, Karen, intervened. "Leave that," she said, pointing to the jewelry box. "It must have valuable things." "That's mine," I protested, trying to get my jewelry box back. "Dorothy, don't be dramatic," Karen replied, taking the chest from my hands. "They're just old jewels. They'll steal them from you at the nursing home." "They're my memories," I screamed, feeling the desperation consume me. "My husband gave me that necklace. Those earrings belong to my mother." "Exactly," Karen said with a malicious smile. "That's why it's better for someone younger to take care of them. Thomas put this in our room." My son took the jewelry box without a word. At that moment, something broke inside me. Not only were they kicking me out of my house, but they were also stealing my most precious memories. "Is that what I'm worth to you?" I asked Thomas, my voice broken by betrayal. "An ATM that you squeezed until the last drop and now you discard." "Mom, don't exaggerate," he replied without showing a hint of remorse. "Exaggerate," I screamed, finally losing my temper. "I adopted you when no one wanted you. I gave you my youth, my money, my entire life, and this is how you repay me." Karen clapped sarcastically. "What a performance, Dorothy. We already know you adopted him. You don't have to remind him every 5 minutes." "I paid for this house," I continued shouting, pointing to the walls I had seen grow. "I paid for your education. I paid for your wedding. I paid for everything you are." "Not at all," Karen replied with contempt. "You live off a miserable pension. You don't even have enough to pay for a decent apartment." "Miserable pension," I repeated, feeling a bitter smile form on my lips. "You think so?" For the first time in days, Karen seemed unsure. There was something in my tone that disturbed her. "Dorothy, enough with the theatrics," she said, but her voice had lost its earlier confidence. While the men continued to take out my belongings, I heard Karen talking on the phone with one of her friends. Her voice carried clearly from the kitchen. "Yes, we're finally getting rid of the old woman," she was saying between laughs. "You have no idea how hard it was to convince Thomas. But when I told him we couldn't have children with his mother in the house, he changed his mind immediately. And she's leaving without a fight," the voice on the other end asked. "What's she going to fight for? She's an old woman with no money, no options. St. Raphael's nursing home is taking her, and she'll stay there until she dies. Problem solved." Her words pierced me like daggers. She spoke of me as if I were an annoying object they had finally gotten rid of, as if my 74 years of life were worthless. "Besides," Karen continued, not knowing I was listening, "this house is worth a fortune. Once we completely remodel it, we can sell it and buy something better, or keep it and rent out rooms. It's a perfect investment." "And what if she claims something?" her friend asked. "What's she going to claim, a senile old woman in a nursing home? No one will believe her. Besides, Thomas is on my side. He'll sign any papers we need." I was frozen as I listened to these plans. Not only were they kicking me out of my house, but they also planned to take over everything I had built. Karen had orchestrated all of this from the beginning. The men finished taking out the last chair. My room was empty, as if I had never existed. 74 years of life summed up in a few boxes thrown on the sidewalk. "Dorothy, everything is outside," one of the men announced. "Where do you want us to take the boxes?" "To St. Raphael's nursing home," Karen answered before I could speak. "I'll take care of coordinating that." "No," I shouted, coming out of my shock. "Those are my things. I decide where they go." "Dorothy, don't start again," Thomas said, appearing from the kitchen. "Everything is already arranged. The nursing home is waiting for you." Without consulting me, I asked, incredulous, "Are you going to lock me up in a nursing home without my consent?" "It's for the best for you," my son replied with that coldness that was now familiar to me. "There you'll be cared for, fed, and have company." "I don't want to be in the company of strangers. I want to be in my own home with my family." Karen laughed with contempt. "Dorothy, you're not family to anyone anymore. You're a burden, a nuisance, a problem that we're finally going to solve." Her words were like a slap in the face. After everything I had given, everything I had sacrificed, they treated me like an old piece of furniture that had to be gotten rid of. "Your place is in the nursing home with the old people," Karen screamed at me, pointing to the door. "Get out of here once and for all." Thomas pushed me towards the exit. His own mother, the woman who had raised him with unconditional love, was being thrown out by him as if she were a stranger. The push was so strong that I almost fell on the sidewalk. "Thomas," I cried, trying to keep my balance, "I'm your mother." "Not anymore," he replied with a coldness that broke my soul. "From today on, I have no mother." But when I went out onto the sidewalk with my belongings scattered like garbage, I saw a familiar figure waiting for me. My brother Oscar was standing by the door, accompanied by 3 men. I immediately recognized his old army buddies. General Oscar Miller at 72 was still an imposing presence. His impeccable uniform, his military posture, his steel-like eyes, everything about him radiated authority and power. Karen and Thomas were petrified when they saw my brother. They knew who he was, they knew his rank, they knew he was not a man to be trifled with. "So these are the brave ones who are kicking my sister out of her own house?" Oscar asked with that deep voice that made anyone tremble. The silence that followed my brother's words was deafening. Karen, who seconds before had been screaming at me with such contempt, now seemed to have lost her voice. Thomas instinctively stepped back, as if the ground beneath his feet had begun to shake. Oscar approached slowly with that military cadence he had perfected over decades of service. His 3 companions flanked him: Colonel Robert Vance, Major Samuel Harris, and Captain James Morgan, all men hardened by years of discipline and honor. "General Miller," Thomas stammered, trying to sound respectful. "I didn't know you." "That I what?" Oscar interrupted, stopping in front of my son. "That I would come to see how they throw my sister out like a stray dog." Karen tried to regain her composure, but her voice trembled. "General, this is a family matter. We—" "Family," Oscar repeated with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Does kicking a 74-year-old woman out of the house she herself paid for seem like a family matter to you?" The neighbors began to peek out of their windows, attracted by the military presence and the commotion. Karen realized that she was being watched by the whole neighborhood, and her face turned red with shame. "General, I think there's a misunderstanding," Thomas said, trying to save the situation. "My mother needs special care, and we—" "Special care," Colonel Robert grumbled, taking a step closer. "Is that why you threw her belongings out the window as if they were trash?" Karen became desperate. "You don't understand. This woman is a problem. She can't keep living here." Major Samuel laughed sarcastically. "A problem? The woman who raised this ungrateful wretch is a problem. You have no right to meddle in our affairs," Karen shouted, completely losing her temper. Oscar got so close to her that he was inches from her face. "Ma'am, when it comes to my sister, I have all the rights in the world." Thomas tried to intervene. "General, please, let's understand what—" "Understand what?" Oscar interrupted him. "That I understand that my sister raised you from a baby, gave you an education, a house food, and this is how you repay her. Is that what I have to understand?" Captain James approached the boxes thrown on the sidewalk and began to examine their contents. "General, look at this. There are important documents here, family photos, medicines, all thrown out as if it were junk." "We didn't throw those things out," Karen lied desperately. "The movers put them there temporarily." "Movers?" Oscar asked with a dangerous calm. "Who authorized a move?" "We did," Thomas replied, trying to sound firm. "This is our house now." The general looked at me, and in his eyes I saw the same protective fury he had when we were children and someone tried to hurt me. "Dorothy, is it true that you paid for this house?" "Yes, Oscar," I replied, my voice breaking with emotion. "With my husband's pension money and my savings. Everything is in my name." Karen turned pale. "That can't be true." "It can't be true," I repeated, feeling the anger begin to replace the sadness. "Do you think I've been lying all these years?" Oscar took out his cell phone. "Robert, call lawyer Fernandez. Have him come immediately with the deeds to this property." "No!" Karen shouted, desperate. "You can't do that." "Why not?" Major Samuel asked. "Do you have something to hide?" Thomas began to sweat. "General, I think there's a confusion. My mother lives here, yes, but the house—" "The house is in the name of Dorothy Marie Miller," Oscar said, reading a document he had taken from his wallet. "I have a copy of the deeds here that she asked me to keep years ago." Karen's face fell completely. All her lies, all her plans were crumbling before her eyes. But she has no money," she stammered. "She lives off a miserable pension." "Miserable pension?" Colonel Robert laughed. "Ma'am, do you know how much the widow of a lieutenant colonel in the Army receives?" Karen shook her head, confused. $3,000 a month, Robert continued, plus the profits from the 3 properties her husband left her as an inheritance. Three properties. Thomas stuttered, his eyes wide. Oscar smiled with satisfaction. "Dorothy never told you the truth, did she, boy? She thought it was better for you to become a man on your own merits." "That's impossible," Karen shouted. "If she had that much money, she would have spent more. She would have lived better." "My sister is a frugal woman," Major Samuel explained. "She preferred to save and make smart investments, all to ensure a future for her adopted son." Karen staggered as if she had been physically struck. "No, it can't be." "Oh, but there's more," Oscar said, enjoying every second of the revelation. "James showed them the bank account." Captain James took a paper from his jacket. "Dorothy Marie Miller. Current balance $245,000. Thomas sat down on the curb, overwhelmed by the information. 245,000. And that's not counting the value of the properties, Robert added. We're talking about a woman with a net worth of over $500,000. Karen began to hyperventilate. "This is a joke. It has to be a joke." "It's not a joke," I said, finally finding my voice. "It's the truth you never wanted to hear. The truth about the poor old woman you were kicking out of her own house." The neighbors who had been peeking out began to murmur among themselves. The story was spreading like wildfire throughout the neighborhood. Karen realized that her reputation was being destroyed in front of dozens of witnesses. "Dorothy!" she shouted, trying to get closer to me. "If you knew you had so much money, why didn't you tell us? We could have solved this another way." Oscar stopped her with a gesture. "Ma'am, I think you've done enough damage for today." "But General," Karen insisted, desperate, "this is all a misunderstanding. We didn't know." "Didn't know what?" Colonel Robert asked. "Didn't know you were kicking an innocent woman out of her own house? Didn't know you were stealing her belongings? Didn't know you were committing elder abuse?" "It's not abuse," Thomas protested, getting up from the ground. "She's my mother. I have the right to—" "You have no right," Oscar interrupted him firmly. "You're an adopted son who has behaved like an ungrateful wretch. And now you're going to pay the consequences." Karen began to cry, but they were tears of rage and frustration, not of remorse. "This can't be happening. We had everything planned." "You had everything planned," I repeated, feeling a new wave of pain wash over me. "Since when have you been planning to get rid of me?" Karen realized she had confessed more than she should have. I didn't mean— Since when Karen—" I insisted, getting closer to her. "Since you married my son, since you set foot in this house, since the first day," Karen exploded, finally losing all composure. "Since you were a meddlesome old woman who wasn't going to let me be happy with my husband." Her confession fell like a bomb on everyone present. The neighbors gasped. Thomas looked at her in horror, and the military men exchanged significant glances. "There you have it," Oscar said with satisfaction. "The truth finally comes out." Karen realized what she had said and tried to take it back. "No, I didn't mean that. I'm confused." "No, Karen," I said with a calmness I didn't know I possessed. "For the first time in 10 years, you told the truth." Karen's confession had fallen like a bomb on the whole scene. The neighbors watching from their windows began to murmur among themselves, and some even came out into the street to hear better. Karen's reputation was crumbling in front of dozens of witnesses. "No, I didn't mean that," Karen shouted, realizing the mistake she had made. "I'm nervous. You're confusing me." "No one is confusing you, ma'am," Colonel Robert said coldly. "You just confessed that from the first day you planned to get rid of Dorothy." Thomas looked at her in horror. "Karen, is that true? You've been planning to get rid of my mother from the beginning." "No, honey, they're twisting my words," Karen replied, trying to take her husband's hand, but he pulled it away. "Answer me," Thomas insisted with a voice I had never heard from him before. "Is it true that since we got married you've been planning this—" Karen fell silent, trapped between truth and lies. Her eyes darted around desperately, looking for an escape that didn't exist. "Silence is an answer," Oscar said gravely, "and a confession." At that moment, Major Samuel approached me with a compassionate expression. "Dorothy, do you have a place to stay tonight? Because you obviously can't go back into this house with these people." "It's her house," I protested, feeling the tears well up again. "I paid for this house. It's my home." "And you will again," Oscar assured me. "But for tonight, I think it's better if you come with me. Tomorrow we'll sort this out legally." Karen became desperate upon hearing the word legally. "General, please, we can work this out among family. There's no need to involve lawyers." "Family?" Captain James laughed sarcastically. "Now we're family. 5 minutes ago you were throwing Dorothy out as if she were a stranger." "It was a misunderstanding," Karen insisted. "If we had known she had so much money, we would have never—" She stopped abruptly, realizing she had just confessed something even worse. "You would have never what?" Oscar asked with a dangerous calm. Karen fell silent, biting her lip. "Finish the sentence, ma'am," Colonel Robert insisted. "If you had known she had money, you would have never—" "What?" "We would have never thought of the nursing home," Karen shouted, trying to save the situation. "Liar," I said, finding strength from the depths of my pain. "If you had known I had money, you would have been even crueler. You would have tried to take everything." Karen looked at me with pure hatred. "You don't know anything." "I know more than you think," I replied, feeling something ignite within me. "I know you were going through my papers when you thought I wasn't looking. I know you were asking Thomas about my financial situation. I know you've been planning this for months." "That's a lie," Karen protested, but her voice had lost all conviction. Thomas moved away from his wife as if he suddenly realized who the woman he had married really was. "Karen, is that true? Have you been going through my mother's papers?" "I just wanted to help," Karen lied. "I wanted to know if she needed financial help." "Financial help," I repeated bitterly. "By throwing my things out the window, stealing my jewelry box. Is that your idea of help?" Karen turned pale when she realized she had mentioned the jewelry box. "I didn't steal anything." "Didn't you?" Major Samuel asked. "Then explain why you took Dorothy's jewelry." "I was just protecting them," Karen shouted desperately. "From whom?" Oscar asked. "From the thieves at the nursing home that you yourself mentioned." The neighbors who were listening began to murmur louder. Mrs. Norman, who lived next door, came over indignantly. "Karen, how could you do that to Dorothy? She has always been so good to you." "This is none of your business, Norman," Karen shouted at her, completely losing her temper. "Of course it's my business," Norman replied. "Dorothy has been my neighbor for 20 years. She's a decent woman who didn't deserve this." More neighbors began to approach, all expressing their support for me and their indignation towards Karen and Thomas. The social pressure was becoming unbearable for them. "Go away!" Karen shouted at the neighbors. "This is private property." "Private property?" Mr. Johnson, the neighbor across the street, laughed. "This is Dorothy's house. You're the one who should leave." Karen realized she had lost all sympathy in the neighborhood. Her screams, her cruel behavior, her public confession. Everything had been witnessed by people who had known me for decades. "Thomas," I said to my son, approaching him, "look around you. Look at how they're looking at us. Is this what you wanted to become, the man who throws out his own mother?" Thomas avoided my gaze, ashamed. "Mom, I didn't know you had so much money." "And that justifies what you did to me?" I asked, feeling my heart break. "Is money the only thing that gives me value as a person, as a mother?" "No," he replied quickly. "But Karen was right about some things. We needed our space." "Space for what, Thomas?" Oscar intervened. "To plan how to rob your mother." "We weren't going to rob her of anything," Thomas protested. "Weren't you?" Captain James asked. "Then explain why your wife talked about remodeling the house and selling it." Thomas froze. "How do you know that?" "Because your wife is very indiscreet when she talks on the phone," James replied. "Half the block heard her plans." Karen realized she was completely exposed. All her secrets, all her lies had come to light in front of the whole neighborhood. "This is a conspiracy," she shouted, pointing at the military men. "You came here to ruin us." "Ma'am," Oscar said with infinite patience, "we came here because my sister called me crying, telling me that she was being kicked out of her own house. The only thing we did was arrive in time to prevent you from committing a crime." "Crime?" Thomas asked, alarmed. "Elder abuse, dispossession, theft, extortion," Colonel Robert listed. "Do you want me to continue?" Karen began to hyperventilate. "You can't prove it. You can't prove anything." "Can't we?" Major Samuel laughed. "Ma'am, we have dozens of witnesses. We have your own confessions recorded, and we have physical evidence of everything you did." "Recorded?" Karen asked with terror in her eyes. Oscar took out his cell phone. "From the moment we got here, everything has been recorded. Your threats, your confessions, your screams, everything." Karen collapsed on the ground, overwhelmed by the magnitude of her defeat. All her plans, all her manipulations had become evidence against her. "Dorothy," Oscar said to me, approaching me, "do you want to press formal charges against these people?" I looked at Thomas, my adopted son, the boy I had raised with so much love. He was standing there ashamed, defeated, finally realizing the magnitude of what he had done. "I'm retiring," I said slowly, remembering the words Karen had used to humiliate me. "From being a mother to someone who doesn't value me. It's final." Karen lifted her head from the ground, her eyes filled with tears of panic. "Dorothy, please. We can fix this. We can start over." "No," I replied with a firmness I didn't know I possessed. "There's no going back. You decided to treat me like garbage, and now you're going to live with the consequences." Oscar smiled with pride. "That's my sister." "Robert," he said, "call the lawyer. We'll start the legal proceedings tomorrow morning." That night, I slept at my brother Oscar's house for the first time in decades. His home was spacious and elegant, a reflection of a successful military career and a generous pension. As I settled into the guest room, I couldn't help but feel a strange mixture of relief and pain. "Dorothy," Oscar said to me sitting on the edge of the bed, "tomorrow we're going to start fixing this mess. But I need you to tell me the whole truth. What else has happened that you didn't tell me over the phone?" I took a deep breath and told him everything. The months of humiliation, Karen's poisonous comments, the way she had manipulated Thomas, the plans I had heard about selling the house. Every word came out like a dagger from my chest. "And why did you never tell them the truth about your assets?" Oscar asked me. "Because I wanted Thomas to be a good man on his own merits," I replied, feeling the tears. "I thought that if he knew I had money, he would become dependent lazy. I wanted him to work, to strive to value things. And instead you raised an ungrateful wretch who kicked you out of your own house," Oscar said bitterly. "I didn't know Karen was like that," I whispered. "When they got married, I thought I would finally have a complete family, a daughter-in-law, grandchildren maybe." "Dorothy, that woman is a viper, and your son let himself be poisoned by her." The next morning, Oscar kept his word. At 9 o'clock sharp, Mr. Fernandez was at the door with a briefcase full of documents. He was an older man in his 60s with that seriousness that characterizes experienced lawyers. "Mrs. Dorothy," he said to me respectfully, "I'm very sorry for what they have done to you, but I assure you that we are going to resolve this completely." For the next 2 hours, we reviewed all my documents. The deeds to the house, the titles to the other 2 properties, the bank statements, the military pension documentation. Everything was in order. Everything was in my name. "This is very clear," Mr. Fernandez said. "You are the legitimate owner of everything. Your son and his daughter-in-law have no legal right to anything." "And can they put me in a nursing home against my will?" I asked, still fearing that possibility. "Absolutely not," he replied categorically. "For that, they would need a court order proving mental incapacity, and you are perfectly lucid. What they did yesterday constitutes several crimes." Oscar leaned forward. "What kind of crimes?" "Dispossession, elder abuse, misappropriation threats. We could be talking about several years in prison for both of them." I felt a chill run down my spine upon hearing those words. As much pain as they had caused me, the idea of Thomas going to jail terrified me. "Mr. Fernandez," I said with a trembling voice, "is there any way to resolve this without my son going to prison?" Oscar looked at me in surprise. "Dorothy, after everything he did to you, you're still protecting him." "He's my son," I replied simply. "He's confused, manipulated, but he's still my son." The lawyer nodded with understanding. "We could reach an out-of-court settlement, but that will depend on how cooperative they are." At 2 in the afternoon, we returned to my house. This time we arrived in the lawyer's Mercedes, followed by Oscar's car with his military companions. It was a demonstration of power, but also of legality. Karen and Thomas were in the garden talking heatedly. When they saw us arrive, their faces fell. Karen tried to run into the house, but Colonel Robert stopped her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Fernandez announced, "I am here on behalf of Mrs. Dorothy Miller, the legitimate owner of this property." "This is harassment," Karen shouted. "You can't come here and threaten us." "We are not threatening anyone," the lawyer replied calmly. "We are notifying you that you have 24 hours to vacate this property." Thomas approached, ashen-faced. "Vacate? What do you mean, vacate?" "Son," I said, approaching him, "this house is in my name. It has always been in my name. Yesterday you kicked me out of my own house." "But you can live here," Thomas protested. "We can fix this. We can all live together." Karen looked at him with fury. "Thomas, don't be an idiot. She's here for revenge." "I'm not here for revenge," I said sadly. "I'm here to reclaim my home and my dignity." The lawyer took out several documents from his briefcase. Here you have the original deeds, the payment receipts, the complete documentation. Everything proves that Mrs. Dorothy is the sole owner of this house." Karen snatched the papers and examined them desperately, looking for some mistake, some legal loophole she could exploit. But there was nothing. Everything was in order. "This has to be fake," she shouted, waving the documents. "These papers are altered." "Ma'am," the lawyer said with infinite patience, "these documents are officially registered. You can verify them at the property registry whenever you like." Thomas collapsed into a garden chair. "It can't be all this time." "Mom, do you really own all of this?" "Yes, son," I replied with pain. "And not just this house. Also the house in the city center and the apartment near the park. Your father left them all to me as an inheritance." 3 properties. Karen stammered, her eyes wide. "You have 3 properties." "And $245,000 in the bank," Oscar added with satisfaction. "Money she saved for years to ensure a future for her adopted son." Karen sat down on the ground, overwhelmed by the revelation. "No, it can't be. If you had so much money, why did you live so simply?" "Because I don't need luxuries to be happy," I replied. "Because I preferred to save for my family. Because I thought it was better to teach Thomas the value of work and effort." "But you could have lived like a queen," Karen exclaimed, not understanding. "I preferred to live like a mother," I said sadly. Major Samuel approached Karen. "Ma'am, yesterday afternoon you threatened Dorothy, publicly humiliated her, and conspired to appropriate her assets. Do you have anything to say about that?" Karen looked at him with hatred. "You don't understand anything. Living with a mother-in-law is horrible. You can't judge me." "I'm not judging you for not wanting to live with your mother-in-law," Samuel replied. "I'm judging you for the cruel way you tried to get rid of her." Thomas stood up and approached me. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't understand." "You didn't understand what Thomas—" I asked, feeling the pain pierce me. "You didn't understand that I'm your mother. You didn't understand that I deserved respect. Did you need to know I had money to treat me with dignity?" "No," he replied quickly. "It's not that. It's just that Karen told me you were suffering, that it was better for you to be with people your own age." "And throwing my things out the window was for my own good?" I asked bitterly. Thomas lowered his head, ashamed. That got out of control." Karen stood up from the ground like a fury. "Thomas, don't let her manipulate you. She's acting like the victim, but we're victims here too." "Victims of what?" Colonel Robert asked with disbelief. "Of her lies," Karen shouted. "She lied to us about her financial situation. She made us believe she was poor." "I never lied to you," I replied calmly. "I just didn't tell you the whole truth, and now I understand why that was the right decision." "What do you mean, the right decision?" Thomas asked, confused. "Because if you had known from the beginning that I had money, you would have treated me well out of self-interest, not out of love. I preferred to know your true feelings towards me." Karen realized she was lost. "Dorothy, we can start over. Now that we know the truth, we can be a real family." "No," I replied firmly. "It's too late for that." Mr. Fernandez cleared his throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have a proposal. You can vacate the property voluntarily and sign a document acknowledging the facts, or we can proceed legally with criminal charges." Karen turned pale. "Criminal charges: dispossession, elder abuse, threats, misappropriation," the lawyer listed. "We're talking about 5 to 10 years in prison." Thomas became desperate. "Mom, please don't let them put me in jail. I'm your son." I looked him in the eyes, seeing for the first time in months something like genuine remorse. "Son," I told him with pain, "yesterday you stopped being my son when you pushed me out of my own house." The words I had just spoken fell like a lightning bolt on Thomas. He stood there, mouth agape, as if he couldn't process what he had heard. Karen, for her part, began to hyperventilate. "You can't do that!" Karen shouted, approaching me desperately. "You can't destroy your own son over a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," I repeated, feeling the anger rise within me again. Was throwing my belongings out the window a misunderstanding? Was stealing my jewelry box a misunderstanding? Was enrolling me in a nursing home without my consent a misunderstanding? We were confused, Karen insisted. "We thought it was for the best for you." "For the best for you," Major Samuel corrected her. "Don't confuse the two." Thomas approached, staggering as if in shock. "Mom, please listen to me. I know I was wrong. I know I did everything wrong, but give me a chance to fix it." "A chance?" I asked, feeling the tears well up. "Thomas, I gave you 45 years of chances. I gave you my youth, my money, my entire life. And when I needed you most, when I was a vulnerable old woman, you betrayed me." "But Karen confused me," he shouted, pointing at his wife. "She filled my head with ideas. She made me believe it was the right thing to do." Karen looked at him with murderous fury. "Don't blame me. You wanted her to leave too." "That's not true," Thomas protested. "Of course it's true," Karen replied. "How many times did you complain about your mother meddling in our affairs? How many times did you say we needed privacy?" Mr. Fernandez observed the exchange with professional interest. It was clear that the couple was destroying each other, making his job easier. "Mrs. Karen," the lawyer intervened, "are you confessing that you manipulated Thomas into kicking out his mother?" Karen realized the trap, but it was too late. "I didn't manipulate anyone. He wanted her to leave too." "Karen, shut up," Thomas shouted at her, realizing that his wife was sinking him even further. "I'm not going to shut up," Karen replied. "If I go down, you go down with me. We both agreed to kick her out." Oscar approached me and put his hand on my shoulder. "Dorothy, have you heard enough?" I nodded, feeling my heart break into 1,000 pieces. Listening to Thomas and Karen blame each other, seeing their marriage crumble, before my eyes was painful, but also revealing. "Mr. Fernandez," I said in a firm voice, "proceed with the legal charges." "No!" Thomas shouted, falling to his knees in front of me. "Mom, please. I swear I'll change. I swear I'll be a better son." "Thomas," I said, crouching down to his level, "it's too late for promises. Yesterday when you pushed me out of this house, you killed something inside me. You killed the trust. You killed the unconditional love I had for you." "But I'm your son," he sobbed, clinging to my hands. "I'll always be your son." "No," I replied, freeing myself from his grasp. "My son would have never treated me like this. My son would have defended me from his wife. My son would have valued the sacrifices I made for him." Karen became desperate when she saw that Thomas was losing the battle. "Dorothy, I'll tell you the truth. Thomas always complained about you. He always said you were a burden. I just gave him the courage to do what he already wanted to do." "Karen, shut up," Thomas shouted at her, but the damage was already done. "Is that true, Thomas?" I asked, feeling my world completely fall apart. "Did you really see me as a burden?" Thomas looked at me with desperation, searching for the right words. But his silence was more eloquent than any answer. "Your silence tells me everything I need to know," I said, getting up from the ground. Colonel Robert approached the lawyer. "What procedure do we follow now?" "First immediate eviction," the lawyer replied. "You have 2 hours to get your personal belongings out. Then we proceed with the criminal complaint." "2 hours!" Karen exclaimed. "We can't pack up a whole life in 2 hours." "You should have thought of that before kicking Dorothy out in 5 minutes," Major Samuel replied. Karen turned to me with one last desperate plea. "Dorothy, think about it. If you sue us, this will be in all the newspapers. Everyone will know you kicked your own son out of the house." "No," Oscar corrected her with a fierce smile. "Everyone will know that an ungrateful son kicked his elderly mother out of the house she had paid for. Besides," Captain James added, "half the neighborhood already knows what happened yesterday. The neighbors witnessed everything." As if summoned by his words, Mrs. Norman appeared at the garden gate. "Dorothy, are you okay? The whole block is talking about what they did to you yesterday." "I'm fine, Norman," I replied, feeling my neighbor's support. "Karen," Norman said with contempt, "I can't believe what you did to Dorothy. She always spoke wonders of you, always defended you when other neighbors said you were a bad person." "That's not true," Karen protested. "Of course it's true," Norman replied. "How many times did Dorothy tell us we were judging you wrongly? How many times did she ask us to give you a chance?" Karen fell silent, knowing that Norman was right. "And you, Thomas," Norman continued, pointing at my son, You make me ashamed. Your mother raised you alone, gave you everything she had, and this is how you repay her. My husband and I spent the whole night talking about what kind of monster can kick out his own mother." Thomas cringed under the weight of Norman's words. It was clear that the social judgment of the neighborhood was affecting him deeply. "Mrs. Norman," Mr. Fernandez said, "would you be willing to testify as a witness about what you saw yesterday?" "Of course," Norman replied immediately. "I saw everything from my window. I saw how they threw Dorothy's things out. I saw how they pushed her. I saw how they laughed while she cried." Karen turned even paler. "That's a lie. I didn't laugh." "I saw you perfectly," Norman insisted. "You were laughing while the men threw the furniture out the window." More neighbors began to approach, attracted by the commotion. Mr. Samuel, Mrs. Yolanda, the Herrera family. They all came to show their support and to condemn what had happened. "Dorothy," Mrs. Yolanda said, taking my hands, "we are all with you. What they did to you yesterday was an outrage." "Yes," Mr. Samuel added, "Karen and Thomas have lost all respect in the neighborhood. No one will look at them the same way again." Karen realized that she had not only lost the legal battle, but also the social battle. Her reputation in the neighborhood was destroyed forever. "This is unfair," Karen shouted. "You are all only listening to one side." "We heard what we saw with our own eyes," Mr. Samuel replied, "and what we saw was a cruel daughter-in-law kicking out a helpless mother-in-law." Mr. Fernandez seized the moment. "With so many witnesses, this case is going to be very easy to win in court." Thomas became desperate. "Mom, please think about what this is going to mean. I'm going to lose my job. My reputation is going to be ruined." "Your reputation," I repeated bitterly. "You're worried about your reputation. And what about mine? What about the humiliation you put me through yesterday?" "But that can be fixed," Thomas insisted. "This can't. If you sue me, my life will be ruined forever." "Your life was ruined yesterday," I told him sadly, "when you decided to betray the woman who gave you life." Karen made one last desperate attempt. "Dorothy, if you drop the charges, I promise we will disappear from your life forever. You will never see us again." "That's exactly why I'm not going to drop the charges," I replied, "because I want everyone to know what kind of people you are. I want you to face the consequences of your actions." The lawyer closed his briefcase with satisfaction. "Well, then we proceed. Gentlemen, you have 2 hours to get your things out. After that, any belongings left on the property will be considered abandoned." Karen and Thomas looked at each other defeated. They knew they had lost everything: the house, the money, the respect of the neighborhood, and possibly their freedom. "Dorothy," Oscar said to me, "do you want to supervise while they get their things out, or would you prefer we take care of it?" "I'm going to supervise," I replied with determination. "I want to make sure they don't take anything that doesn't belong to them." The next 2 hours were the most tense of my life. Karen and Thomas entered the house like ghosts defeated, and Silent followed closely by the military men and the lawyer. Every movement was supervised, every object evaluated. "That television stays," Colonel Roberts said when Thomas tried to unplug the television in the living room. "Dorothy paid for it." "But we bought it together," Thomas protested weakly. "Do you have the receipt?" Major Samuel asked. "Can you prove you put money into it?" Thomas didn't answer. He knew that for all these years I had been the one paying for everything: the appliances, the furniture, the house repairs. He had simply lived comfortably on his salary while I covered all the major expenses. Karen went up to what had been our room with a suitcase. I followed her, wanting to make sure she didn't take anything that didn't belong to her. When I saw her open my jewelry box, I stopped her. "That's not yours," I told her firmly. "I'm just taking my own jewelry." Karen lied. "What jewelry of yours?" I asked. "All those rings and necklaces belong to my mother and my husband. You've never had any jewelry of your own." Karen turned red with anger. "You can't prove it." "I can," I said, taking out my phone. "I have photos of all this jewelry from before you married Thomas. I even have the certificates of authenticity for the most valuable pieces." Karen dropped the jewelry box as if it were burning her hands. Her last attempt to rob me had failed. "Besides," I added, "the Colonel is recording all of this. If you take something that isn't yours, it will be additional evidence against you." Karen began to cry, but they were not tears of remorse, but of frustration and rage. "This can't be happening. We had our whole life planned." "Planned based on what?" I asked. "Based on stealing my properties, based on getting rid of me, based on you being a nuisance." Karen exploded, finally losing all composure. "Based on the fact that you had already lived your life and it was time for us to live ours." Her words hurt me, but they also liberated me. There was no longer a shred of doubt about the kind of person Karen was. While she was packing, I went down to the living room where Thomas was sitting with his head in his hands. Mr. Fernandez was reviewing some documents at the dining room table. "Thomas," I said, sitting across from him, "do you really think I deserved this?" He raised his head, and for the first time in months, I saw something resembling the son I had raised. His eyes were red, full of tears. "No, Mom," he whispered. "You didn't deserve any of this, but I let myself be carried away by Karen. She always said we were too young to have a mother-in-law in the house, that other couples had their privacy." "And that justifies throwing my things out the window?" I asked. "No!" he shouted, hitting the table in frustration. "Nothing justifies that. I went crazy. When Karen started screaming for you to leave, something snapped in my head, and I treated you like you were a stranger." "It's because to you I became a stranger," I said sadly. "You let Karen dehumanize me. You let me become a problem to be solved instead of your mother." Thomas sobbed openly. "Is there any way to fix this? Any way you can forgive me?" "I don't know, Thomas," I answered honestly. "The damage you did to me is very deep. Not just physical, but emotional. Yesterday, I felt like I had raised a stranger for 45 years. Karen came down the stairs dragging 2 suitcases. Her face showed a mixture of defeat and resentment that made her look 10 years older. "Are you finished?" Major Samuel asked. "Yes," Karen replied bitterly. "We've taken our few belongings from the poor old lady's house. Period." "Karen," Mr. Fernandez warned her, "everything you say is being recorded. I recommend you be more careful with your words." "More careful?" Karen laughed sarcastically. "We've already lost everything. What more can happen?" "You can go to prison," the lawyer replied, without flinching. "And with every disrespectful word you say, you are worsening your legal situation." Karen fell silent, finally understanding the gravity of her situation. Colonel Robert made a call, and a few minutes later, a locksmith arrived. "We're going to change all the locks," he announced, "so you don't have access to the property." "We can't even come back to get something we forgot?" Thomas asked. "No," Major Samuel replied. "Anything you need, you will have to request through the lawyer and with supervision." While the locksmith was working, a moving truck arrived. To my surprise, it contained all my furniture and belongings that had been thrown onto the sidewalk the day before. "I thought they had taken my things to the nursing home," I said, confused. "We intercepted them," Oscar explained with a smile. "When Karen called the nursing home yesterday, we also called and canceled everything. Then we hired a moving company to pick up your things and store them in a warehouse." "Is everything there?" I asked with hope. "Everything," Captain James confirmed. "We even rescued some photos that were broken and had them restored." I felt a mixture of relief and gratitude towards my brother and his friends. In my darkest moment, when my own family had betrayed me, they had been there to protect me. The movers began to bring my belongings back into the house. Seeing my furniture, my photos, my memories returning to their place filled me with an indescribable emotion. Karen watched all of this with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "How could you plan all this so quickly?" she asked me. "I didn't plan anything," I replied. "I just have a brother who loves and protects me, something you never understood." "And what do we do now?" Thomas asked, watching as his few years of comfortable life vanished before his eyes. "Now you face the consequences of your actions," Mr. Fernandez said. "First thing tomorrow morning, we will file the formal complaint." "Is there no way to avoid the trial?" Thomas insisted. "We could consider a settlement," the lawyer replied, "but it would have very strict conditions." "What kind of conditions?" Karen asked, clinging to any hope. A public apology in the local newspaper, financial restitution for damages, a 5-year restraining order from approaching Dorothy, and community service in a nursing home so you can learn the value of respecting the elderly. Karen made a face of disgust. Community service in a nursing home? Exactly, Major Samuel smiled, so you can learn what it means to care for the elderly instead of abusing them. And if we accept those conditions, Thomas asked, then you would avoid prison, the lawyer replied, but the agreement would include a full confession of guilt. Karen and Thomas looked at each other, weighing their options. It was clear they didn't have many alternatives. The locksmith finished his work and handed me the new keys. For the first time in months, I felt that my house was truly mine again. "Dorothy," Oscar said to me, "do you want us to stay tonight in case you need company after all this?" "No," I replied, surprising myself with my own strength. "I want to be alone in my house. I want to feel peace again." Karen and Thomas carried their suitcases to a taxi they had called. Before getting in, Thomas turned to me one last time. "Mom," he said with a broken voice, "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, but is there any possibility that you could one day forgive me?" I looked him in the eyes, seeing for the first time in years the scared child he had been when I adopted him, but also seeing the cruel man he had become. "I don't know, Thomas," I answered honestly. "Forgiveness can't be forced. It's earned with time, genuine remorse, and real change in behavior. And if I accept all the conditions of the agreement, and if I do the community service and learn to truly value the elderly, then maybe," I said, "maybe in a few years we can try to rebuild something, but it will never be the same as before." Karen got into the taxi without a word, defeated and resentful. Thomas looked at me one last time before following her. "Take care, Mom," he whispered. "You take care too, son," I replied, surprised that I could still call him that. The taxi drove away, taking with it the two people who had shattered my life and my heart, but also taking away the pain, the humiliation, and the fear I had lived with for months. For the first time in a long time, I was alone in my house, but I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. 6 months after that day that changed my life forever, I find myself sitting in the garden of my new house, a beautiful property on the outskirts of the city that I bought with part of my savings. The afternoon sun caresses my face as I write in my diary, a habit I've adopted since I regained my peace. The legal process ended 3 months ago. Karen and Thomas accepted the out-of-court settlement after their lawyer explained that they faced a certain conviction of up to 10 years in prison. The public apology they published in the local newspaper was read by the entire neighborhood, exposing their cruelty and my innocence to the whole community. Karen is doing her community service at St. Raphael's nursing home, the same place where she had planned to lock me up. The nurses have told me that at first she was arrogant and dismissive of the elderly, but little by little she has begun to understand the vulnerability and dignity of older people. Her pride has been completely broken, and now she cleans bathrooms and feeds patients who cannot care for themselves. Thomas works at another nursing home in the city center. His supervisor called me a month ago to tell me that my son had cried while helping an old man who had been abandoned by his family. "I think he's finally understanding what he did to you," the supervisor told me. "Every day he spends here is a lesson about the value of parents and the cruelty of abandonment." The scandal completely ruined both of their reputations. Thomas lost his previous job when his bosses found out what he had done. Karen was fired from the store where she worked after customers started avoiding her. Now they live in a small apartment on the other side of the city, far from the neighborhood that knew their crimes. My brother Oscar comes to visit me every week. We have regained the closeness we had lost during the years when I was so focused on raising Thomas. "I should have intervened sooner," he always tells me. "I should have seen what that woman was doing to you." "You couldn't have known," I reply. I didn't want to see the reality myself. The neighbors from the old neighborhood visit me constantly, Norman, Mr. Samuel, Mrs. Yolanda. They have all told me that my story helped them to value their own mothers and mothers-in-law more. "Your courage taught us that it's never too late to stand up for yourself," Norman told me the last time she came. "I have used part of my money to help other elderly people who have suffered family abuse. Together with Mr. Fernandez, we have created a foundation that offers free legal advice to elderly victims of mistreatment. Every case we help resolve confirms that I made the right decision by not staying silent. The house where I lived for so many years, I sold to a young family with small children. I couldn't keep living there after everything that had happened. Every corner reminded me of the humiliation, the betrayal, the pain. This new house is my sanctuary, my place of peace where no one can hurt me. 2 weeks ago, I received a letter from Thomas. It was long, full of tears and genuine remorse. He told me about his work at the nursing home, about the elderly people he cares for, about how every day he understands better the magnitude of what he did to me. "Mom," he wrote, "every time I see these abandoned old people, I see your face. Every time one of them cries out of loneliness, I hear your cry from the day you pushed me out the door. I have been living in the hell of guilt, but I know it's exactly what I deserve." The letter continued, "I'm not writing to you to ask for forgiveness because I know I don't deserve it. I'm writing to you to tell you that I finally understand who you really are. You are the woman who saved me from an orphanage, who worked double shifts to give me an education, who sacrificed her youth for my future. You are the noblest woman I have ever known, and I was the cruelest son that can exist. Karen and I divorced," he confessed in the letter. "We couldn't stay together after what we did. Every time we looked at each other, we saw our cruelty reflected. She moved in with her sister in another city. I live alone now, and that's okay. Solitude is my punishment. If one day in many years when you have completely healed from all the damage I caused you, if one day you could consider the possibility of us talking for 5 minutes, it would be the greatest gift of my life. But if it never happens, I understand. I accept it. It was my decision to destroy our relationship, and I accept the consequences." The letter ended. "I love you, Mom. I know I have no right to say it after what I did, but it's the greatest truth of my life. I love you, and I am infinitely sorry for having failed you when you needed me most." I read that letter 5 times before putting it away in a drawer. I still don't know if I will ever reply. The pain is still there, alive and sharp, but I also feel something like hope. Maybe with enough time and genuine remorse, we can rebuild something small of what our relationship was. But for now, I'm focused on my own healing. I've started taking painting classes, something I always wanted to do but never had time for. I've traveled to places I've dreamed of seeing since I was young. I've made new friends at the library's book club for the first time in decades. I live for myself. My daily routine is simple but satisfying. I wake up early, have breakfast on my terrace, watching the garden I've cultivated with my own hands. I read the newspaper work on my paintings, have a quiet lunch. In the afternoons, I receive visitors or visit friends. In the evenings, I read or watch television, and I always go to bed grateful for the peace I have. The money I saved for so many years now allows me to live with dignity and generosity. I help my brother when he needs it. I support charitable causes, and I have ensured that when I die, all my assets will go to the Foundation for Abused Elderly. Sometimes when I'm alone at night, I think about Thomas as a child. I remember his first steps, his first words, the spontaneous hugs he would give me when I came home from work. I remember the nights I spent awake when he had a fever, the times I defended him at school, the sacrifices I gladly made for his well-being. And I wonder where that loving child got lost. At what point did he become the man who pushed me out of my own house? Was it my fault for protecting him too much? Was it Karen's fault for manipulating him? Or do some people simply change in ways we cannot predict or control? I don't have definitive answers, but I have learned to live with uncertainty. I have learned that I cannot control the actions of others, but I can control my own reactions. I have learned that love should not be unconditional to the point of allowing abuse. I have learned that it is never too late to stand up for yourself and reclaim your own dignity. Yesterday, I received a call from the supervisor of the nursing home where Thomas works. "Mrs. Dorothy," he said, "I wanted to tell you that your son is doing an exceptional job. He has developed a special connection with the patients, especially with those who have been abandoned by their families. He seems to have found his calling in caring for the elderly. I'm glad to hear that, I replied, and I really was glad. Despite all the pain, he is still the child I raised, and I want him to find redemption. I also wanted to tell you, the supervisor continued, that we established a scholarship for studies in geriatrics in your name. Your story inspired many people to become interested in the care of the elderly. That news filled me with pride. My suffering had served for something positive to protect other elderly people from similar experiences. This morning, as I was watering my roses, I thought of a phrase I read years ago. Sometimes the most beautiful things grow from the hardest ground. My new life, my peace, my purpose all grew from the hard ground of betrayal and pain. I don't regret adopting Thomas. I don't regret giving everything for him for so many years. I only regret not understanding sooner that kindness should never be practiced at the cost of self-destruction. When the sun sets each day, I sit in my garden and feel gratitude. Gratitude for having had the strength to defend myself. Gratitude for having a brother who protected me. Gratitude for the neighbors who supported me. Gratitude for the lawyers who helped me. And gratitude for discovering that at 74, I can still start over. My story is not just about betrayal and pain. It's about resilience, dignity, and the ability of the human spirit to heal and flourish even after the deepest wounds. I am Dorothy Miller. I am 74 years old, and I am finally completely free.